Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. Reed riding solo again. Mike is out of town for this week, so he didn't get a chance to kind of check out comics. Earlier today, I posted a video of the best new comic books of the week, and there was one sort of glaring absence from that list, which was Ultimate Spider-Man, issue number 21. Jonathan Hickman, David Messina on that one, and that book wasn't even close to making best new comics. And I think it's time to kind of admit on that book, Ultimate Spider-Man has gone from a great comic book to one that is actually quite poor. And that's not really something I ever thought I'd say about that series. When I look at the fact that Jonathan Hickman is writing it, while I had my qualms with what Jonathan Hickman did with X-Men, his Fantastic Four run holds up as one of the 4 or 5 best runs in all of comics that I've ever personally kind of bought and read. So I'd say of the last 20 years, that's one of my all-time favorite runs. I thought some of the stuff he did with his Shield series was interesting. I think even stuff like he did like that God series a couple years ago, while kind of out there, had its moments and showed some real creativity. But this Ultimate Spider-Man book, man, it started out so strong, and to have Marco Cicchetto and David Messina as the two artists on this, I think both have done a great job. Cicchetto's obviously the stronger of the two, but I think there's several things that have just gone wrong with this book that make it, in my opinion, almost kind of a disaster. Where I think if you actually ask me, what am I enjoying more, Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man, or Ultimate Spider-Man? While it was not even close a year ago, where Ultimate Spider-Man was just such a better book, I would say at this point, Amazing Spider-Man is actually giving me more enjoyment and entertainment than Ultimate Spider-Man. And that's not that Amazing Spider-Man has somehow turned into, an incredible book. It's just been mildly entertaining with some good plot threads. Ultimate Spider-Man's become boring. And one of the things is when there was first sort of these issues where you had stuff like Mary Jane and Peter going out to dinner with Gwen and Harry, I thought those were kind of cool issues early on because I thought that it was character growth, that was world building, this was establishing stakes. And I think for the most part, up through, maybe the first 15, 16 issues, Hickman was putting some pieces on the board in some interesting places. You had the revelation that Gwen was part of this Mysterio group. You had, Uncle Ben and J. Jonah Jameson being these sort of investigative reporters. And there was enough issues early on where you felt like, okay, this is building stakes, it's world building. All of that kind of goes away when the series is actually being cut at issue 24. And I know Jonathan Hickman is saying that was the plan from the beginning. I know the Ultimate Universe has been ramping towards this return of the Maker for 2 years, and that's more apparent in stuff like the Ultimates and Ultimate Wolverine. But one of the things is this book, by far the biggest struggle this book has. Um, Peter really hasn't progressed much for a book that's ending in 3 issues. I think one of the things is early on, I was really a fan of the first arc where Peter had some really rough moments where he kind of got his butt kicked, where he didn't really take down his first villain. And obviously, look, the caveat I could put to this is if Hickman is just leaving at 24, and then we're going to have this ultimate event, and then the book is ultimately relaunched. And there has been some rumors that Brian Michael Bendis might come back to Marvel. Maybe he's going to take over. Donny Cates was originally supposed to write this. Maybe he'll become the writer. And so I do think if all Hickman was doing was buying time until we got to this event, and it's going to continue on with a new writer, then I think there is some potential. But what was sort of surprising is my early investment in Peter having some losses and not really being the best superhero and having some of his victories is I assumed this series was going to run for a relatively long time. And so it was cool to see those sort of baby steps, so to speak, of the character and have where had some potential and you were going to see him get better and more seasoned. And it made sense for a man in his mid-30s to, who's never been a superhero to finally, get these powers. It would make sense that he's not instantly, as good as the Peter in the main universe. But if we're ending truly in 3 issues and it's not coming back, then a lot of that seems wasted. A lot of that seems like we just spent so much time building to something that was never going to arrive. I think the other part is as we get 20 something issues into the series, there's a difference between a few issues that are kind of breaks that establish stakes and world building and just having boring issues. And the fact that we're going to have only 24 issues and 1/12 of the series was dinner issues with Peter and MJ and Gwen and Harry. I don't know, man. That's a rough thing to have. That 2 of 24 were dictated to conversations at dinner. That, in all honesty, it's not like they developed all these huge, monumental, game-changing stakes in those issues. There was some fun moments and some cool character interactions, but nothing that was like sensational where you're like, wow, that was incredible. Other than like I guess MJ decked Gwen at the end of the last issue, but I think overall you've had so many of those decompressed issues like that. And what's so weird is Jonathan Hickman does a lot of that. But what has typically always worked, and where I think his Fantastic Four run, and I think his Avengers run as well, one of the things he does is really well is he'll establish some of these things that kind of come out of nowhere. And you really wonder where it's going. And then 10, 15, 20 issues later, there's some delivery on it. And you're like, wow, that's really cool that he kind of pulled those threads. The problem with Spider-Man is with only 3 issues left, there's just no way that he can satisfactorily deliver on those threads. And that I think anything that would happen now would feel so rushed. And it feels like this 24 issues largely is just going to be a conflict between Peter and the Kingpin with him and Harry, and that it looks like that's what we're building to at the end. And again, while that could have some satisfactory moments, the fact that we had 2 years to build to this and we just wasted so many issues is very weird. I think the other part is there's a distinct lack of Peter Parker in this comic book, and I would rip to shreds, the Amazing Spider-Man comic book when they had, I think, Zeb Wells' run in particular. And look, Zeb Wells' run was bad for a lot of reasons, even when Peter was on the page. But there was a lot of issues of Zeb Wells' run where Peter was not a factor. I think especially there was that, I believe, Gang War comic book that they had that took place, and Peter was an afterthought in that. And I remember being really upset and seeing a lot of fans be like, man, this is terrible. Why is there an Amazing Spider-Man event and Peter is an afterthought in it? And what I'll say for this, I believe we've had 4 or 5 issues now where Peter does not show at all in the book. There was an Uncle Ben and a J. Jonah Jameson focused issue, and then issue that was focused all on Gwen, and then this recent issue where it was all kind of backstory and development for Mr. Negative. Again, not an awful issue, but if this is a 50 issue run, if this is a 75 issue run, that can make some sense. And it's not like nothing happens. It's just too much time on something that we're only getting 24 issues of this. And this last issue is all focused on Mr. Negative's backstory. This is kind of what one-shots and spin-offs are for. And again, I'm not advocating for those, but when you only have 24 issues of something, to waste 4 to 5% of the entire run on the backstory of a character that, let's be honest, hasn't even really been a part of this run. We're sitting here with 4 issues left, and this is what we're dedicating page time to. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think it's not even something where, Mr. Negative seems like he'll be this huge piece at the end, right? There's not enough time left to really tie this in and have him be this major player at the end and have this, oh, it's a huge conflict between Peter and him, and that's why we're finding out now. No, it's kind of just, hey, one of these villains that's been in these books that have like 15 villains, here he is. And I'm sure it'll play a factor in the end, but is it worth the page count that we lost? Is it worth 1 of 24 issues dedicating this to something so late in the game? And I think that's the other part of this that's been disappointing is it just kind of feels like sometimes we just get random issues. And it doesn't retroactively hurt this series. And that I think the arc where Peter and Harry were escaping Kraven the Hunter was really strong. I think that opening arc was really, really great, the character work that was done. But I do start to wonder if as fans, we were just really excited to see Peter with MJ. And we kind of gave the book a lot of breaks because of that and goodwill. And that for me, where this book has really changed is with only a couple issues left, I really look at it. And if you ask, like, hey, what's the major thing that we've been building to for something that's ending in 3 issues? especially because Hickman's had so many quotes about how this was always the plan and it was always set up this way. It almost feels like he only had a 10 or 12 issue plan and got extended to 24 issues, and we've gotten 10 to 12 filler issues. And I think the issue with this is that's not a huge issue if the comic book doesn't cost $5 a pop. But when it's $5 a pop for this comic book, and you would think you'd be getting premier talent and premier storytelling, and instead it's here's the backstory of a character you really haven't had much time with, who hasn't really factored into the plot and doesn't really seem like he'll be a big piece of this. I don't know, man. It's hard to justify. And this doesn't change my opinion on Jonathan Hickman. I think he's still one of the best comic book writers out there. It'll never, affect how I see his Fantastic Four run or his Avengers run, which I think is also really good. But this is disappointing. It's disappointing. And I think, not to call out anybody in particular. I'm sure there was a plan with this, but it's just weird how comic books have such a platform like this with Ultimate Spider-Man that this was as a comic book fan, there are very few comic books that sort of break contain into popular culture. Right? There's very few that cross over to where the normies, the folks who don't buy this stuff, the people who rarely will pick up comic books, hear about it, get excited about it, and it sells. And Ultimate Spider-Man was one of those books. This has been one of the more consequential comic books of the last decade for sure. And that early on, these things were getting to multiple printings. You had a lot of excitement. I remember, talking with this comic book with people who normally don't talk comic books. And it just seems like all that momentum and all of that was stifled. And what a loss that is for the industry, in my opinion. And that you really just had to deliver classic Spider-Man storytelling. And what's so interesting is Jonathan Hickman's actually really good at that in the issues where he does it. But there's so much decompression and conversations and weird things that, I'll be honest, I haven't really enjoyed the last two or three issues. And if it wasn't ending soon, this might be a book where I'm like, hey man, I'm done. In that I would say not only has Ultimate Spider-Man gone from the, probably one of the books that like always was at the top of my stack when I'd get it. It was one of the first ones I'd read. It was the same week Conan came out or something like that, or Batman, because Batman's my favorite character. It would be like the second or third book I'd read. To where now it's kind of in the stack and I read it and it's okay, but I haven't read an issue in a while that's really made me go like, man, wow, that's great, or let me read that again and kind of get more details and context the way that I do with books like Conan and Flash Gordon, where I'll typically read those two or three times when they come out just to see the art again and go through the panels and see if I missed anything. Ultimate Spider-Man's just become a little boring. And I'll be honest, right now, I think Ultimate Black Panther is probably a better comic book than this. And I think without a doubt, Ultimate Wolverine has been significantly better than this. And so, I enjoy it more than I have the Ultimates. The Ultimates just never won me over as a comic book. I think it's trying to do too much, and I think it's so wrapped up in trying to make a statement about things that sometimes it forget it's a comic book, and instead seems like it's trying to address political issues, social issues. And again, there's a place for that. I just feel like that comic is a little too focused on it. But I'd just be interested to see folks' thoughts about Ultimate Spider-Man. And then I have to say, this is went from a book that I anticipated every week to just it's become a massive disappointment. And I'm through. I'm in through the end. I want to see how it concludes. I'm hoping that Hickman can somewhat stick the landing and provide something with it. But I do think it's had so many issues now with no Peter Parker, with very little development with his kids, with very little development in his personal life, that this particular run, I think it would be very hard for anything to happen in the next three issues that goes like, oh, that saved it, or that made it go better. And again, that's not to say the run's a disaster. I do think there will always be some great things from this comic in terms of that first arc that we got with the book, but it's so weird in that this became a lot more like a Brian Michael Bendis comic book than a Jonathan Hickman comic book. And I don't say that as any massive insult against Brian Michael Bendis, but I think, especially later Bendis at Marvel, one of the things that Bendis was so good at was he was always fantastic at writing the first 5 or 6 issues of a book. His Iron Man run had a great first arc. His Guardians of the Galaxy had a great first arc. I think some of the other books that he did towards the end, even his X-Men books, I thought the first arcs were really good. And then it would come into the same sort of problems where it would be a lot of decompression and people talking and weird character moments, and it would fall apart, and you'd kind of look back and go like, dang man, what happened? How did we get from where we were to where we are? And that's never been something I've seen with Jonathan Hickman. And I don't know if maybe he didn't want to write the book all the way, or if it's just something that he had greater plans for, if it was supposed to stretch past this. I don't know. But it does, again, not to trash Jonathan Hickman. The weirdest thing for this is one of my all-time favorite writers. This is a guy that his name being on a book normally makes it an instant buy for me, even if it's characters I don't know or don't really read or much at all, because I have so much trust in him as a writer typically that he's going to deliver. But yeah, it's very strange to see Ultimate Spider-Man be a book that I think is almost bad now, not necessarily even. I find myself trying to be more polite to it than I really would want to be, because that first arc had such good stuff in it. But if you had just put these last 5 or 6 issues out, I don't know that I ever would have picked the book up. And I think the most inexcusable thing is, how do you have so many issues that do not have Peter Parker in a book called Spider-Man? Right? Call it Ultimate Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, whatever you want to call it. If you got a book with Peter Parker as the main character, to have, I think we're almost at 20% of the story that Peter has not even appeared in the issues, that's almost unforgivable. And if it was a different writer or a different character, I'd be a lot more harsh on it. And I think it's just kind of worth seeing what do people think on that. But I don't know. Be interested to see those folks' thoughts. I will say, I'll use the same video to say, if you haven't been reading the Ultimate Universe much, Ultimate Wolverine is the best Wolverine comic book that's come out in a long time, and I do think that's worth your time if you want a good comic book to read. I do think Ultimate Black Panther as well is really strong, but Ultimate Spider-Man has fallen on some tough times. It'll be interesting to see what these last 3 issues behold. But let me know your thoughts down below, folks. As always, thank you for watching. God bless you. You have a great rest of your day.